Hello, everyone. Welcome to Playwright. Jeez.
Oh, perfect.
So motorcyclists, like they have to, like what? I mean, I'm not going to discriminate against anyone who chooses a different style of transportation, but they have to know when they're out there looking at motorcycles, like what if I have to get somewhere, but it's like 11 o'clock p.m. And I found that like the decision that most motorcyclists make is just, who cares? Right. Let's just go for it. What's the worst that could happen? And it's like you're waking up everybody along the way.
Surprising to me is that the vehicle is so much smaller and yet so much louder. Like how is it that like a 4-door, Toyota can be literally a quarter of the decibels of one of these motorcycles?
I've asked that before. It's like, you think by now we would have worked out like quiet motorcycle technology.
Oh, sure.
But all the motorcyclists are like, no, man, that's not the point.
Is that a slightly British motorcyclist?
I don't really know where I was going with that. I think I just wanted to do something that distinguished it from my own voice. Yes. It's a little bit easier to...
No, man, that's not the point. We're here to burn rubber.
It's not the bloody point. We're going to wake up a queen.
That's right. I didn't grow up in Brooklyn, New York. Just stay quiet.
Well, let's continue with the recording then. This is Playwright. We make video games here. We don't actually make video games here. You know what we do by now.
Yeah, we come close.
My name is Ryan Hamann. You can call me H.
And I'm Ryan Quintal. You can call me Q. Should we pitch some video games today?
Yeah, let's see how politely we can do this.
Very polite.
So what I have today is... you're supposed to guide a creature through a maze using light. It's like a creature that is blind except that it can perceive light, which I guess is all vision. Whatever, you know what I mean.
Right. Only bright light. It's got like cataracts or something.
Right, yeah. You guide a creature through a maze using light. You can reflect the light to make it illuminate certain objects, but you may have to find other ways to hide the light from certain angles, so it doesn't like catch, so like if you have, for instance, your source of light, like a flashlight, off to the side, and you want to reflect it on a wall in the distance, you have to put up a different wall to make sure that the creature doesn't see the direct light out of its peripheral vision or something. So it's all about reflecting light, and it's all about creating pathways in these probably like hexagonal grids where you're both creating a path to where you want the creature to go, and you're creating reflecting light sources. So I don't know. Let's see where we can take that.
I like the concept of this idea. It almost, in my head, reads as a little Pikmin-esque, if that makes any sense. Like
kind of Lemmings-ish as well, yeah.
Like I know maybe in this pitch you were talking about something where you're at a god angle and you're just invisibly controlling these sources and paths of light. But I wonder if it wouldn't be more interesting to be more of an Olimar style small character in the world, and you're having to rotate big structures, almost like a Tomb Raider or God of War, like Uncharted style puzzle to keep the stuff moving along and to guide these creatures.
I think the only thing about that doesn't really sit well immediately for me, but there's ways around it, is that I think it's important because essentially this is like a big puzzle game. This is kind of inspired by Hex Cells, which I've been playing a lot of recently, although it could probably fit in well with a lot of the like Zachtronics games, like Infiniminer and Infinifactory and such. But I think the thing that would make it difficult if you're playing a small character also within the maze is that you don't have that same perspective over the entire, you can only really affect what is immediately around you. Whereas I guess when I pictured this, and it doesn't need to stay this way, certainly, I'm happy to change details along the way, is like, I pictured it as like a scientist that is guiding like a lab rat through a maze or something like that.
In your head, do you picture it that the animal just starts walking down a path, almost tower defense style, and you're trying to triage throughout the way? Or does this thing stop and pause and have moments of like waiting for you to activate a source of light to kind of keep it moving?
I think it would be a more satisfying puzzle if it didn't walk on its own, because if it did, then you can just kind of ignore the light aspect of it.
Yeah.
I want that to kind of be the guiding force through this. And so if it did just move on its own, then you could just rotate all the pathways to just make a path to where you want it to go, instead of having to guide it and beckon it.
Yeah, I would also, maybe as like a modifier, like to find a way to overcharge light, or make, if you have like extra bright light that you're able to create or introduce, then maybe I don't know, for whatever reason in my head, it's a beetle, like a large sort of lumbering exoskeleton creature. It starts running, or it charges at really strong signals of light or colors of light, like a bowl. And that's how you can smash certain cells and break apart the light that's being reflected.
You know what would also be interesting is if you could mix colors. And so maybe there's certain species, like maybe there's like 3 of these beetles in certain mazes, and they only are attracted to one color in particular. And so you have to find ways to mix the light to guide certain beetles in certain directions.
Oh, yeah. Or you could do something where the light color affects, since it affects speed, or maybe some property of this creature, then you could almost develop pathways like a mini metro style and get the creature to build a certain momentum to circumnavigate jumps potentially, or get over obstacles that they normally wouldn't be able to. Like if you can get them to build up speed and then take a hard left, they'll kind of skip over something.
I think that this would be really fun, and we say this frequently, as either a VR game or as something you would play on like one of those big Microsoft Surface tables.
Yeah.
I like the idea of having some sort of a physical interaction where you have to kind of manually spin the flashlights that are in fixed positions, and you can kind of move around the table to get a view of this mirror maze from all directions. There's a game that I've been playing recently called Moss, where you are a little mouse going on an adventure. And you, this is in VR, I should mention, you are this spirit that's kind of overseeing this mouse's journey. And so you control it like a regular 3D platformer, but you yourself have a fixed perspective. And it's this little elaborate world, and each room is kind of a little puzzle box almost. And you can, look under objects and move your head around to see behind certain things and find treasures, and kind of explore this little woodland world that this mouse finds himself in. And I think there's something kind of magical about everything being a truly 3-dimensional space, whether that's real objects or just virtually.
Yeah, when you talk about the Microsoft Surface type of thing, I almost want to bring in that studio computer fold-out thing that Microsoft made that has the physical dials, so you could actually physically manipulate the sort of handles or whatever of these mirrors. That would be really neat.
I love those because Microsoft has, and I don't know if it's just a Microsoft thing, but they have one of those dials that you can attach to the screen, but it is like detachable. And so you can just pick it up and put it elsewhere, which I think would be a super cool way to, you have to like move it to each of the joints or the, I guess the axles, the rotation points where the walls would meet up.
Yeah, it would feel like having one of those physical, almost Resident Evil style keys that you always need in those games.
That'd be really cool.
Yeah, and so you could take the light and let's say maybe you have to go down certain paths to acquire something like a light gel or something that you could apply to one of the lights. And now, like, once you go down path A, that was the easiest, but that unlocks path B, path C, and you could ramp up difficulty, or you could make that like the different types of runs, right? Like you could say, okay, well, I beat this on green with the green light path, but can you beat everything on the purple light path?
I wonder if it'd be interesting also if there were things that could either harm your creature or harm the light source, or, certain objects or creatures that were so big that they can kind of cast a shadow over certain areas. And so you had to be careful to work around those obstacles and to make sure that the enemies were always fenced off and weren't able to get through to your creature. It's all just kind of puzzle elements. Obviously, there would just be one solution to each puzzle. And so, how many pieces you decide to throw at it just makes it more complicated and more difficult to solve, potentially more rewarding when you get it.
Well, if your key creature that you control responds to additive light, and you can add different light colors together, and like the brighter it becomes, the more it reacts to different things or has different behaviors. But then you could have these, quote, enemy creatures that are patrolling that maybe you're trying to throttle their speed by giving them different color lights, or they respond differently to these lights. And now you could find yourself needing to, at one part of the game, depending on the obstacle, create something where there's only intermittent light hitting your creature. So you have another one of these enemy creatures that you've controlled with, say, well, for as an example, we'll use red light, blue light. The enemy is being throttled with red light, but then blocking and showing the blue light that kind of has your character stopping, so he doesn't like get hit by the spikes or whatever that are popping up out of the ground.
What if the enemies are afraid of light and your creature obviously enjoys the light, and so you have this constant back and forth between the areas that you are shining the light to scare away the enemies your character is being drawn towards, which would put him closer to the enemies. And so you want to make sure before you can take the offensive against the enemies, you have to make sure that the pathway is blocked off, so your creature either can't see it or can't access the enemies.
Yeah, and maybe even one side of your creature is the only side that can defend itself, and you find yourself having to, back your creature up into certain places just so you're keeping your, defenses towards the enemies.
That's interesting. We're out of time. That's all the time we have on that one. Let's come up with a name. I'm going to call this one Guiding Light. I think that seems appropriate.
Nice.
Before we get to your pitch, while I'm thinking about it, we don't usually have a little conversation between pitches, but you mentioned a particular game a few weeks ago, and I hadn't heard of it before, but ever since then, I've been seeing it on the front page of Steam, and I kind of wonder, is it actually any good? Is that House Flipper game? Do you know what do you know about that? Because you mentioned it.
I've only seen gameplay of it, and it seems like you literally just go around a house with paint buckets and brooms and a hammer and knock down walls. It's one of these like half physics sim, in a way, completing a puzzle, right? Like just putting a house back together in a way that's pleasing. And I don't really know what the full loop is, but I imagine it's rebuild it in your Simsian image of what a house should be. I'm sure they don't let you get like Frank Lloyd Wright on the thing.
Well, that's interesting because I guess, if anyone has an opinion about it, then write in. We'd love to hear, because
please.
I'm just surprised that like something that's been consistently popular for at least a few weeks now, that I just don't hear it talked about at all. I must just be running in the wrong circles.
Yeah, I feel like for whatever reason it's a Twitch game, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Like in the new definition of what a Twitch game means and not the old definition. Where it's just fun, you can interact with your streamers as they're telling you, oh, knock down that wall, and there's a little bit more of a fun element when you're collaborating through it, maybe.
Okay. Anyways, I don't mean to distract from things. Why don't you deliver a pitch today?
Okay, well, it wouldn't be an episode of Playwright unless we did something musical in some way. So let's talk about a game that is coming out very soon. My pitch is very simple this week. Inspired by my fiance as we were at a record shop this past weekend. Overcooked, but you are making and pressing records for remixing and or delivery.
All right. Well, yeah, that's interesting. All right. Well, let's see where we can take that. I'm starting the clock.
Okay.
Okay, so the one thing that I don't want this to become, and I don't mean to start off negative, I just want to steer us away from what might be a tempting avenue, is if this is going to be about making music records, I don't want this to just be tasks that you would be doing with any job. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Where, there's a certain amount of like burning the CD and putting it in a box and shipping it out the door and stuff like that like doesn't feel creative. So I feel like if you're going into a creative industry, I guess cooking is a creative industry as well, but if you're going into something that is explicitly artistic, then it should require some level of actually producing the art. So with that restriction on the table, let's see what we can do.
Yeah, I agree. So in my head, one of the things I was thinking about here is, wouldn't it be interesting if you are, we've used some version of this before, but almost a low-level employee at a radio station that is, the radio DJ is either saying that they're going to play a certain type of music, and as opposed to having like full song records, you maybe have records that are just single instruments or beats or patterns in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And you're trying to get the correct kind of like, oh, the audience wants to hear pop music now. And so you get, some, sort of popular vocals and a synth and some electronic drums. But then they're like, okay, now they're interested in jazz, and you're going, and your job is to only change like as few instruments as you can to get to the next genre.
That's interesting. I like that. I was kind of also thinking, and this is completely different. We can completely disregard this if we want. I just had a thought.
Hey, that's what we're all about.
If we're in like a VR space and there's like a circle of instruments around us, and basically it's about making music, but we have like a loop pedal, so to speak. And so after we play one of the instruments, then we have to actually like kind of play it. It's not just like pressing a button. It's like you have to hit the drums, and you have to, at least strum the guitar or whatever. You would press a button on your controller and warp to whatever instrument in the circle that you're currently looking at. And so maybe you're trying to like build a song out of each of these instruments that just loop whenever you leave them. And so you have to think about, going back to it and turning off the instrument that you were just at once its part is over. So maybe you have like each one is color coded, and you have like a Guitar Hero stream coming down the screen, but it's just kind of like a line of a certain color. And so you have to, while the line is active, that instrument has to be playing, and you can set the pattern. So there's kind of creative element. And then when the line cuts off, you have to turn it off, and maybe there's little flourishes in there. You have to do a little drum solo or a guitar. You have to really hot dog it for a little bit or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. One of the things that I think we should try and capture a little bit about the spirit of Overcooked that I think is so great is there is a level of order fulfillment. Like the requests are coming in sort of to spite you or despite you. Yeah. And the idea of maybe this is a live performance or something, and you see people streaming in, and depending on what type of people are streaming in, that they like certain types of music. And so you're constantly trying to
it's like profiling them then.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're constantly like trying to, maybe they're just regular people and they're wearing like jazz t-shirts. There you go. We're all set.
What do I look like, a hip hop type of person? What are you trying to say?
Yeah, exactly. So someone wearing a hip hop t-shirt joins the crowd. And so on the fly, you're constantly trying to manage and keep the crowd happy with the constant influx of people who are either listening to the station or showing up to the performance. Like you're a street performer.
There's almost like an element of drop mix in here, which we've mentioned before.
Yeah.
And so you have maybe, let's say, to follow drop mix's example, let's say you have like 5 different audio tracks that can be playing at once. On each of those 5 tracks, you can select one instrument from a range of instruments, each associated with a genre.
Yeah.
And so depending on which instrument is playing, they kind of contribute a little bit or a little bit more to the mix. And so if you play jazz drums, that might not be as jazzy, as noticeable as if you were playing like a jazz saxophone, which, that's, if you layer a jazz saxophone on top of a rock song, then it stands out. It's changed into something different now. Whereas if you play jazz drums under it, you can kind of get away with it for a while, unless it's like really, really crazy. Yeah, and so you have these 5 stations you have to manage, and it would be interesting if, and this would probably require creating hardware, which people don't want to do.
A bunch of plastic instruments, sign us up.
Well, you can do like those fader keys that you see on like a soundboard.
Oh, yeah.
And so you can kind of like fade
DJ
them up
Hero.
and fade them down. Yeah. DJ Hero had a couple of those. And then maybe little buttons you can do to cycle through instruments or use the fader to select the instrument or something. But, something to make you feel like you're a DJ and you're creating the music as you go.
I mean, I think that that's cool, but you could even dip into the quote full Overcooked and make it such that you're actually controlling more than one person, right? Like maybe you and a friend are trying to manage all these stations like an entire orchestra, and it's the going back and forth. And if you're alone, you can swap between the characters and kind of do it very quickly. But ideally, you're yelling at your friend, you gotta play the drums, and that's
Okay.
more what it's about, like communicating back and forth of like one person's getting the information and has to pay attention to, okay, they said they want to hear a popular song. Okay, we need to get, the guitars going. We need to get the piano going.
So let's say there's 4 instruments or 4 types of instruments, each one mapped to a face key. And there's like 5 bands, like live performances happening in this room. And so you have to run between them, trigger the correct face key to get that instrument to play, to try to like reach the equilibrium that your crowd wants.
Yes, maybe you're even, here we go. You're the sound guys. You're like the roadies, and you're controlling like the soundboard for all these different bands at the same time. And so you're like running to one mixer and like turning up the bass, and then running to the other and turning up like violins or something.
I feel like if you are just turning up a performance that's already, like a roadie wouldn't choose what type of music is being played.
Right.
Yeah, but if there were like multiple bands, then that would make sense that they wouldn't necessarily be in sync with one another. You could be like in a studio and there just happen to be all these bands that are playing in different recording rooms or something.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, if you're doing something with, let's say some of the interface feels a little bit like a soundboard, like you were talking about, I love the idea of being able to monitor the levels of a track and knowing that a track has some rhythm or sound coming to it and trying to like adjust it up and down for what's like pleasing. Maybe you're even not trying to perform something, but you're trying to like mix or master a song correctly. And, 2 people are going back and forth of like, I need you on the synth. And the other person's like, I need you to turn up the drums. And they're just running back and forth frantically trying to keep the whole song going from start to finish, because you only get one shot at the recording.
Maybe you have to monitor multiple songs being recorded, kind of determine what each of them need as you like run between these different stations. Kind of like how in Overcooked you have, if you leave something on the burner for too long, then it starts to beep at you. Like maybe if a recording is going really bad, then some light will come on and you have to like rush to that station, like, and then listen to it and determine what that particular song needs at that moment. Maybe the guitar is turned way down and it's trying to do a solo. And so you have to kind of keep in mind 5 different songs to really like listen and be intentional about assessing their needs.
Yeah, maybe like of these performances, there are people who are just like slowly going out of key. Like, okay, the drummer's off now, so I got to go turn the drummer down on song A, and then this person is failing on track 3, so I have to go turn them down, or this person's like compensating. And I love if you take this and you add in like increasingly crazy soundboard setups and these different stages like you get in Overcooked of like the shifting pirate ship and all of that stuff, you could really figure out a way. I mean, you'd have to over exaggerate what a soundboard is, right? You'd have to like physically represent it in a larger space, but I think it could be really cool.
And maybe like with the shifting walls, like certain performers get pulled into other songs and you have to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
But anyways, we're out of time. We've spent enough time on that one. We have to come up with a name for it now. And the easiest would just be like overconducted.
Overconducted is good.
Overtuned, overdrive. That has different connotations, I guess.
Overdrive, has the driving sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, Overconducted is pretty good. I'd love to do something about tracks or something. Maybe it's just hit record. Could that be a thing?
Sure, because it's kind of a verb and also what you're hoping to produce.
Yeah.
It could be hit record or a hit record.
Yeah, that's right. And that's it. That's how you score each level. You get how many gold records did you make in your recording session.
Oh, so this is set in the past then.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a period piece. All right. Well, let us now go to our community to see what they have to say. Every week we receive community correspondences. They can either write in to our email, that is playwrightcast@gmail.com. They can post on our website, playwrightcast.com/pitch, or tweet us at playwrightcast. If you, the listener, have a fun video game idea that you would like to share on the show and have discussed in exhausting detail, then submit it to one of those locations and we will read it on a future show. And could be very soon, could be as soon as the very next show. You never know. We don't necessarily go in order. Anyways, this comes from Matthew Taylor, a new listener, who says, "Love your show, just found it thanks to Game Scoop." Awesome. My idea comes from my love of the game Don't Starve, which is a top-down craft survival game. The basics of Don't Starve is that you collect twigs, rocks, and other items on many procedurally generated biomes to craft weapons and tools. Your goal is to survive as long as possible. 4 seasons occur in the game. Each season gives new challenges: cold in winter, heat in summer, lots of rain in spring, etc. There's only more. The etc. isn't really... Just tell me what happens in the fall.
Please, we need to know.
Maybe it's a spoiler. There are some things to be spoiled in that game if I remember correctly. It gets weird. There are bosses for each season that can come and wreck your camp if you're not careful. Now for my pitch. I want a game where you are a homeless human living in a city. Your goal is the same as Don't Starve, which means you are only tasked with surviving as long as possible. You can collect random things and craft these things into tools, weapons, items to help your goal. Seasons will play into the game heavily, much like Don't Starve. You can eventually craft items like backpacks or shopping carts to help you carry more things. Is that where they get the shopping carts? I always just assume that they stole them from grocery stores.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, what a noble profession. Maybe you can do something like get government assistance that can help you in many different ways. Possibly go collecting cans for money. Maybe learn a skill so you can do some busking for money on the corner. Different biomes also play into the game, such that the downtown, more rats and birds, uptown, safer area but risk of cops forcing you out, city dump, lots of cheap things to collect, starting area, etc. I've been addicted to Don't Starve's game mechanics and gameplay, especially with Don't Starve Together's multiplayer aspect, but I think this could easily be translated into a city. I'd like to keep gameplay and concept fun and lighthearted, similar to Don't Starve. Well, we'll see what we can do. That's interesting. Let's start the clock.
Matthew, thank you so much for writing in, and we really appreciate all the new people that have come from the Game Scoop podcast. But I will say this. As I just recently was working at IGN and in San Francisco, there's a big homelessness problem there.
We should mention the homeless people are not the problem. It is the fact that they are homeless,
yes,
and that the fact that our society cannot support them infrastructurally.
Yeah,
that is
what a
the
good
problem.
Point.
So
yeah, even the language about homelessness is coded, right?
So just to be clear of like what side of the fence we sit on this issue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he says to keep it lighthearted, and I think that there's like, yes, we can try and attempt to do that, but I also think it would be interesting for this game to showcase, maybe be able to tell a story or maybe do something where it shows the other side of that life.
That's kind of where I wanted to go with this as well. Like this could be a really great tool for imparting empathy to people. Kind of like Heart Life is a similar type of thing. That one's more narrative, and you're kind of destined to fail as you're managing multiple low-paying jobs. But you could keep it more accessible and more lighthearted in presentation. But I think you can still impart, kind of like Animal Crossing is. It is very lighthearted in presentation, but like I feel like you kind of learn a little bit more about paying your debts and arranging schedule
Oh, yeah.
payments and, just keeping a good like budget for yourself in a way.
I might show up and a talking animal's like, hey, you totally abandoned us for the past year. Where have you been? And I'm like,
That's
oh my
right.
God, this is really real. So yeah, I think that there's a way to do this where you're dealing with a lot of people who are reacting maybe very negatively to you or who are very unhelpful. And like the citizens who you would normally think of being this resource for you, he talks about rats and birds or whatever as being dangerous. Maybe it's there's some aspect of the citizenry that are dangerous, of like you're literally on your last leg and you just don't get any of these NPCs to help you. Like that could be a good way of selling that experience and also having like it tied to a game mechanic.
And that's interesting because, there's so many interesting systems that you can really get into here. Like if you are begging for money, then you would probably be most successful if you made yourself very obvious and maybe, put yourself in a very heavily populated street corner or something, but then you'd also be more of a potential target for police or nasty people who do bad things to homeless people. It's just whatever kind of, I don't know how dark we want to get with this, but
sure.
But there is like risk reward there. Approaching people to ask for money oftentimes is kind of a risk reward. They might cuss you out. They might be generous. They might, you might feel a little bit guilty because maybe they feel pressured into giving up something, and then you realize that they don't have a lot to give in the first place. And it's all these interesting choices you have to make in these situations.
I'm sure it wasn't Matthew's intent necessarily to have us hung up on like how to treat this issue with sensitivity, but there's an aspect to it that like, okay, let's go. This is probably maybe a little too on the nose or insensitive, but let's talk through some things. Like, what if you were able to go to a scrap yard or a dump or whatever, and that's the place where you could get, a cardboard so you could construct a sign, like your ability to like construct a sign or get the parts to create a vessel in which you could hold money. And then you're like going uptown to try and harvest this, like waiting outside a store is a very high risk area, tons of visibility. The like meter that's going to fill up, that's going to get you taken away or hurt is like going up much, much quicker in those areas. But that's also the place where people are coming out of the convenience store and they've got an extra 25 cents and they're willing to throw it in a cup.
And so you have these kind of similar gameplay mechanics like you would get in a lot of survival games of crafting, because a lot of the things that you need have to be crafted, whether you are repurposing something that's abandoned, or whether you are creating your sign, like you said, or creating, like in the pitch, there was the idea of busking, of performing music or something, and maybe you would have to find an instrument at the dump, or maybe you save up some of the money that you've begged off of people to buy an instrument. And so once you have money, a lot of interesting choices take place there. Like maybe you can choose to either buy an instrument to perform and gain more money that way. You gain money a lot quicker. Or you can choose to, go for a night in a hotel and get a shower, and maybe you are more presentable in the morning. You don't smell as bad, and so people are more apt to approach you and maybe be a little bit more generous. Or maybe ultimately you're trying to save up money so that you can buy a suit and a haircut and go out and, find yourself in a job interview or something. And, it's all these kind of end states of like, what do you do with money? And then the more you have on you at the time, the more at risk you are of getting robbed or something.
Yeah, I think that like you should give and take and play with those expectations. Let's say there's meters and you're trying to manage both your basic things to survive, like food that you need to eat. Maybe there's energy, and that's like coffee or something like that. Then you have, your appearance or your hygiene. I think homeless people are in a jam, right? Because we've either all seen or maybe ourselves experienced this moment where like somebody looks like they're not like desolate enough. Does that make sense? Like you see somebody who's like reasonably well dressed, or maybe they've got good sneakers or something, and they're on the side of the road and they're asking for change. But then so is somebody who is like literally, shoeless, shirtless, who's in the same position. And I think that there are human bias towards both of those people, right? Where one is too much and the other is like not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so making a decision like cleaning up your hygiene for the initial pass while you're actually fully clean, there's like the donation's slow or it's harder to do something. So by trying to walk it back or improve yourself, you can also put yourself in a tougher spot.
And that might just depend on like what part of town you're in as well.
Yeah, totally. I didn't play enough Don't Starve to know, but is there any idea of like an animal or companionship in that game? Because a lot of times, you see these, whether it's a stray or a pet from a former life being, a companion to somebody without a home in that scenario.
I was just thinking like actually it would be an interesting place to take this is if each of these characters, as you're re-rolling, like maybe this is like a roguelite or something like that, as you're re-rolling, each character has a backstory where they came from, and it kind of imparts this idea of like they say, everyone is just one bad month away from homelessness. People oftentimes aren't there because they deserve to be there or they've done necessarily anything wrong. They just happen upon a really hard situation or, just too many bills and they lost their job at the same time, or they had a medical expense or something like that. And so you have all these different backstories to give you an idea of who you were. And then each character would have like one, I don't want to say like a disability, that's not right, but like a burden in a way, something that makes it harder, not necessarily like a negative connotation, but like something that just makes it harder. So like you could have a child or a dog or an addiction or something that is an additional draw of resources.
Similar to what you get in something like State of Decay, where you have people that also have random bonuses, like maybe they're resourceful or they're crafty, something like that, where maybe they're charming, right? Like somebody who's performing an instrument or
that's
asking,
a good point.
That's an advantage in that world. And I think that I'm glad you introduced that, because I think that having those little backstories are a great way to start building that sympathy or build that empathy rather for these people. And you're just trying to make it. And, as your run finishes, you're saying, I lost the mother and child, I lost the grandfather, I lost the dog, all of that stuff.
Right. We're out of time. I would love to spend more time talking about this. I really, really like this idea because, survival games, like they all have one thing in common, and it's that they're all set in the woods. And it's interesting.
Or space.
Yeah, right. When you have this like very different scenario where you are surrounded by opulence and wealth and technology and modern society, but there's no safety net for you to fall back on. Like you are just as exposed and afraid as you would be if you shipwrecked on an island or something like that. So super cool idea. Thank you very much, Matthew, for sending that in. We have to come up with a name for it now. No name is suggested, which is just fine. What are we going to call it?
I mean, this might sound like a joke at first, but honestly, I think the really sad thing is it could also be called Don't Starve.
Yeah, I mean, legally, we couldn't put another game called Don't Starve on Steam.
We'll call it Don't Starve, no apostrophe.
Don't Starve.
Yeah, I mean...
Do you like homeless for the holidays if it has the seasonal thing?
Oh, my God. I hate us both. I would love to do something that sounds in tone to almost a Papers, Please, or something that strikes a sadder sort of note. Aren't sometimes homeless people referred to as like the invisible millions or something like that?
Yeah,
I wonder if there's something along those lines.
You can call it change because that is what you're asking for and also what you want to see happen in your life.
Oh boy. Yeah, I think change is good. Change is pretty good. So
okay, you could have the Tupac song in there as well. That was submitted through our website. That is playwrightcast.com/pitch. You can also get in touch with us, playwrightcast@gmail.com or @playwrightcast on Twitter. And you can suggest your own video game idea and watch it become something entirely different on any of those locations. And be famous for a week.
One thing that you won't hear entirely different every week is our theme song. That is Hello World by PROTODOME off the album Blue Noise. It's a very good song and a great album. H, before we close out the show this week, I wanted to follow up on a little piece of correspondence that we got on episode 59 in the comments section.
Excellent.
Our dear contributor who wrote in, Ocean Bronco, said in the comments, Ocean is my real name.
Hey, never doubted it. That's awesome.
Whether we called it into question, I apologize, but Ocean, you're out there and we appreciate it.
Let's close out with a miniature pitch today. And what I want to bring to the table, just to take us out of the show, is you have to talk a forest fire out of burning your house down.
Oh my God. I moved away from that.
We'll see you next week.
Bye.